And Tim Walz speaks on Wednesday. There will be a watch party in Alliance, Nebraska. He once taught school there.
Brian Mastry joins us in the studio with what we can expect.
Aaron, John, in the last couple of weeks since Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was added to the ticket, we've become well versed on his Nebraska roots. Born 60 years ago in West Point, an hour's drive northwest of Omaha. His family moved around a lot. He spent a number of years in Valentine before landing in the tiny town of Butte for high school. He had a graduating class of 24. Walz got a social sciences teaching degree at Chadron State and took a job teaching 6th grade in Alliance, where he met his wife, Gwen. Wednesday night's watch party will be in Alliance.
Since the late 80s, Alliance, Nebraska's claim to fame has been Carhenge, a replica of England's Stonehenge, but built with gray, spray-painted vintage cars. If voters elevate a former elementary school teacher from the same community to the vice presidency of the United States, Carhenge will have some tourism competition.
Yeah, it was actually really cool that he mentioned Carhenge. A lot of people, they've seen it in commercials or in music videos over the years, but they don't actually know what it is or where it is. So to get that kind of shout out, like, hey, that's in Nebraska, particularly in Alliance, that felt really cool.
Ricky Gervais is helping plan a congratulations to Coat Walz rally on Wednesday to celebrate his contributions in the classroom and on the field. A number of community members and those who knew him best are expected to share stories by the city fountain at Central Park, a point of pride even for those who don't agree with him politically.
It's a nonpartisan event. There are going to be speakers who are Republican, definitely not going to vote for him, but they still have great things to say about him and that they'd like to share with the community.
So after all the speakers in Alliance are done sharing their stories Wednesday night, the crowd will shift to a local pizza shop in Alliance to watch Governor Walz's speech at the convention. On your side, Brian Mastry, 6 News.